In the corner where? Here, that's Arjuna. Yeah. Does anybody know who these guys are? Yeah. Yeah, this is the Trinity. This is Brahma. Middle is Vishnu. On the left is Shiva. Who knows what they do and who they are? Who are they? Yeah, creator, sustainer, and destroyer. That's right. We're going to get started. I think there's more people coming. Are there more people out there right now? Huh? Just those chickens? Okay. I'll light this and we're going to get started.
Is the Mahabharata board game fun? Yes, we played it. Yes. We did play it. And actually we went
Depends on whether you're a Pandava or a Kaurava.
We actually played it at Sonali's house, and they're so good at it. Oh, it was so much fun to play with them. I think they do this, but
A friend of theirs actually developed the game.
yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Okay. You know, I would move these front chairs out, except that I'm afraid everybody would move back a row. If you want to, that's the old thing. If you want to sit, if you want to find a seat in back at church, you have to get there early. Okay. You guys, come on up close, please. Yeah, I'm. This is a relationship. This is not a stage production. So thank you. Thank you. Okay. We're listening to. This is kind of fun. We'll turn it off here in a second because we're going to get into the story. But this is Swami Kriyananda singing songs of India from back in the 80s. He said, you know, I was known worldwide for singing Indian bhajans and Indian songs. And nobody in the West knows it. Nobody in Ananda knows of that. So he spent an evening just sharing and talking about the songs and singing them. And that was the last we ever heard of it. And he used to chant Indian chants for us periodically. And then somebody asked him, Swamiji, why did you stop? And he said, you know, because when I hear that music, I can't bear to be here. Just, you know, the call of the divine is so sweet and so deep. The song of that one is Come to Me as Sorrow. So, let's sit up straight. Realize that we are working to be in the presence of the divine. Hare Hare Krishna, Hare Hare, 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 Hare Hare Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Hare Krishna, Hare Hare, 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 Hare Hare Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Hare Krishna, Hare Hare, 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 Hare Hare Krishna, Hare Hare. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Paramahansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, humbly we bow before you. Beloved Lord, as we listen to this great epic, awaken within us the awareness of your presence in every moment of our lives. Help us to learn how to cooperate with life, how to fight the battles you send us, how to be victorious, how to live in your joy, how to live in your love. Om. Peace. Amen. So nice to have you all here. This is it's a privilege to share the Mahabharata. Who here is familiar with the Mahabharata? Okay, so who is not? Let's do that. Okay, good. The Mahabharata is one of two epics that come from India. And one of the things that's the signal about India is that it is the oldest culture on the planet. It's the oldest civilization, and it has remained essentially unchanged across the many, many thousands of years since the last higher ages. Every other culture has come and gone and come and gone and changed values and changed points of reference. But India has remained essentially the same throughout all those eons. And because, who here knows when I talk about yugas? Who here knows what that means? Okay? So what are yugas? Very nice, yes. They're cycles of time. And just like we go from winter into spring, into summer, into fall, back into winter again, this world, this planet, goes from high ages into descending ages, and then down into really a spiritual winter, a nadir of understanding and attunement and clarity of the purpose of life and how life is made. And then it ascends back up into a place where essentially everybody just understands intuitively what life is about and how to cooperate with its purpose and allow it to fulfill itself. And then back down again into low ages where people are just really bewildered. And India has held those values from the high ages down through the descending ages. It's very interesting. If you go to India and you talk to them about things, the reference is always backward. Because do you know where we are in the cycles of time, the yugas? We're just barely coming out of the lowest age. Well, if you're coming down from a high age into descending ages, where do you look for understanding, for wisdom, for clarity? You look backward toward the high age, so it's always looking backward. Yogananda said that of America and India, he said these two countries, these two cultures will lead the world in dharma, in understanding, and in clarity. And because America, what's unique about America? What's unique about the United States of America? It has a little bit of every culture of the world, absolutely. But it was born, in addition, it was born at the beginning of this new age. It was born in 1776, just as the world was coming out of Kali Yuga into a new age of energy. So you have the highest teachings on the planet being held, combined with, when you're on an ascending age, where do you look for wisdom, clarity, and understanding? You look to the future, yes. You look to tomorrow. You look to you have an intuitive understanding that it's getting better. And that if you look forward, it's going to be more powerful. Okay? So you have a marriage of the ancient wisdom and this new understanding and approach to life. Okay? India, okay, as ages descend, what happens is there's a general level of forgetfulness. The average mankind loses the capacity day after day to know where joy and happiness come from. And as the ages progress, there's a story. One of the epics is called the Ramayana. It's the story of Rama and Sita and Hanuman, the great devotee, who incidentally is related to one of the characters in our story, because Hanuman is the son of the god of the wind, with all the power of that. And we have one of the characters in our story who is his half-brother through the god of the wind. So that'll show up. It's really fun. But it's from the higher age descending. It's said that it's from 5,000 years ago. And it probably is dated from then. But some stories say that it's actually, which is when the third age was descending into the second age. These great avatars, they come at the break of the ages because there's a need for a huge transition, and understanding needs to be held through that transition and reinterpreted. So these great masters come for these things. But there are legends that say that Rama and Ayodhya were actually from descending Satyuga, the highest age, into the third age. So much so, in the high ages, that there's so much purity and understanding that at one point Rama sends his emissaries out through the kingdom to see how the kingdom is doing. And the emissaries come back, and everything is beautiful in the entire kingdom. There's harmony everywhere, except one of the emissaries comes back and he says, everything's perfect except way, way far away in the far corner of your kingdom, I heard a fisherman and his wife having an argument. And Rama said, I'm so sorry to hear that, because it means that the next lower age has already started. One single argument heralded the entry of the third age descending. So you can see how much purity there is. Well, as the cycles descend, the higher age of Dwapara in descending was an age of warrior kings. So picture yourself now in India, a land of majesty and regal warrior kings who are ruling with Dharma at the beginning of the age, but as time goes on, they're becoming increasingly selfish and self-centered and greedy and avaricious, and Dharma is getting lost. And in the midst of this, the wise, the sages, because it's a land of sages, the sages know that in the darkest age, Kali Yuga, mankind isn't going to remember anything about what's true. And out of compassion for mankind in the darkest age, these great sages come. There's one sage in particular, Veda Vyasa. He decided that he was going to capture the essence of India, the essence of Sanatana Dharma, these great teachings, in an allegory, in an epic story that held the truth, so that even though people wouldn't remember it mentally, they would remember it vibrationally by hearing these stories. And he wrote the Mahabharata, and he wrote the Mahabharata to weave in all of this sacred understanding. So we're going to have to figure out how to do this. Here we go. Okay, nifty. All the sacred understanding. And the sacred understanding, what he did was he took real live events from the descent of Dwapara Yuga into the entrance of Kali Yuga, which is about 2,600 years ago now. And then he overlaid it or wove into it the story of each one of us coming out from God, losing ourselves in the kingdom of matter and externality, and then finding our way back. And that's really what the Mahabharata is. It is said of the Mahabharata that it is the longest, it was a poem when it was written, it's the longest poem ever written in any human language. Anybody who doesn't already know, want to make a guess how long this poem is? No. Not even close. It's a really fun, it's 100,000 verses long. 100,000 verses, couplets. And it said that Vyasa was tuning in. He was going into a superconscious state to bring this out. And he didn't want to have to break his rhythm to write this down. So he went looking for a scribe. Because he's a great saint, he went in the heavenly realms, and he's looking for a scribe. And Ganesha is known as the great scribe. Everybody know who Ganesha is? Who's Ganesha? Yes, there's Ganesha. He's in the middle because he's the penman for this story. And if you look at Ganesha really close, you'll notice something about his left tusk. Yes? Yeah. Do you know why? Okay. He made a deal. Why is it chopped off? Yeah. He made a deal with Vedavyasa. He said, okay, I am the divine scribe. I will be happy to be your scribe under this condition. You must never keep me waiting. I will write as long as you talk. If you ever keep me waiting, deal's off. Vedavyasa said, okay. And he snapped off his tusk and started to write.
There's another piece of that.
Okay.
It said, I'll agree to your deal, but you have to understand everything that you're writing down. And that bought him some time.
That's right. Vedavyasa said that to Ganesha. That's right. So the bargain was struck. You know, the reason for these epic tales is that they provide both insight and also entertainment value. And the more entertained we are, I loved Dunbar's Sunday service this last week. In fact, I love most of the services he gives at this level because they're so light and entertaining and fresh and fun. I like the one with the jar. That was very fun also. Kind of hung out there for a while in the back. But it's essential that we find that chord. It is said that man's need and hunger for story is more compelling even than our need for food. And you see it, people go to movies endlessly. They watch TV constantly. The main thing about TV is it's providing story. It's providing context. It's providing a linear pathway through the episodes of life that give us something to get traction on. Whether it's good traction or not, it doesn't really matter. We need story, and if we don't get good story, we will take bad story. But we'll take story. And it's interesting that you can tell a culture by its heroes, the greatness of a culture by the greatness of its heroes. Okay? So if you've got, in the West, what do we have for heroes? We've got basically a fairly degenerate group of people that we hold up. We have athletes, most of which have very little moral character or exhibit very little moral character. We have politicians, and we have movie stars. In fact, this is kind of fun. This is a sideline, but Swami said that there were 4 basic cultures, ancient cultures, alive on the planet right now. Anybody know what they are? The Romans, Native Americans, Atlanteans, Sanatana Dharma, Indians, us. There's us, But if you look, he said the Romans, well, the Atlanteans are in charge of what? Technology. And you can see their influence globally, okay? The Hindus, Sanatana Dharma folks, self-realizationists, what are we doing? We're bringing light back to the planet. We're bringing Sanatana Dharma back to the planet. The Native Americans, what are they doing? Environmentalists, yeah. And the Romans? They're in charge of what? Empire. They're in charge of government. They're in charge of entertainment. And they're in charge of the military, of course. But you see, the consciousness of those things. In India, the heroes have always been saints. They've always been, across all of time, those that remind us of our higher potential, of our contact with something greater than just our daily experience. And this saga, this epic, has great heroes in it. And it's also got great villains in it. But this saga, this episode, this epic, is more true than most of the stories you'll hear in the West. Because we tend to be monochromatic in the West. We tend to have very simple storylines that they're interesting. So you've got Cinderella, you've got Sleeping Beauty, and it's always the same. The prince kisses the princess, the sleeping princess, and they get married and live happily ever after, right? It's not true in here. In this epic, what you have is something that's far more true to life. You have these great heroes that have these fatal flaws. And you have these really evil characters that have some very, very good qualities. And somehow they find their way through the different parts of life. And, it seldom ends happily ever after because life seldom happens happily ever after. What you have is moments of choice and the harvest of choice. And you start to discover that if you behave mostly right, that things will mostly work out for you. But not always. And even sometimes you behave wrong and things will work out for you, but not always, and often not. And that there's a real correlation between good behavior or dharmic behavior and attention to detail in an uplifted way. But the fruit of it isn't always outward and isn't always obvious. And we start to understand that life is much more subtle and much more convoluted. And we start to learn that maybe our connection isn't to just outer behavior and outer realities, but to inner things. And then what you have in this epic is you have a relationship, a constant relationship. And from the very beginning, you have a constant relationship between the human realms and the divine realms. And there's always this dynamic interaction going on back and forth between what's obvious and outward and clear and on the surface and what's going on in the background, where the influences of spirit, the influences of the divine, are playing themselves out as well. And that there's never a moment, there's never a time where the influence of the divine is not a part of the story. So it's a remarkable epic at that level. And what's fascinating about this, and I've found it to be universally true now, I've told this story for probably about 20, 25 years, and I tell it once every year or two. And I've listened to it dozens of times, if not 100 times at this point, and read it, is that it touches a chord. It's said that when it was written, it came straight from the divine, and that it was said that even listening, just hearing the story, whether you understand it or not, just hearing the story would free a person from enormous karmic burdens and uplift their consciousness. And I found that to be universally true. How old were you when you first heard me tell this story, Aiden? Because I think you're the youngest one in the room, and you certainly have heard it several times. About 5. And he nailed it. He was right there. He was riveted to it. And then they went and got the comics, and they read the comics, and Mom read the story. And I remember reading it to Erica when she was, how old are you, Raina? You're 9? I read it to her when she started about 7 or 8. Yes. I was divorced at that point, and Erica was living with her mom, which was appropriate. But I missed connecting. So what I would do is I would call her up every night before she went to bed. And I would read the Mahabharata. And again, she couldn't get enough of it from very, very youngest age. And it weaves into consciousness and understanding, a vibrational understanding of how life really works. In the middle of the Mahabharata, this enormous thing is one single chapter, and it's very short. And it is the Bhagavad Gita. It is the Hindu Bible, the Bible of India. And it's basically a conversation. This is a picture of, right there in the far left corner, upper left corner, it's a picture taken from the Bhagavad Gita. And what you have is you have Krishna, who is an incarnation of Vishnu, the sustainer. You have him having a conversation with his disciple, Arjuna. And the conversation takes place on the eve of battle. And what you have, this epic is about, the allegory in this epic is about the two sides of our nature. What are those two sides? What are the two battling sides of our nature? It's the part of us that aspires to the light and to reclaiming the greatness of our soul nature, and the part of us that just really likes it comfortable at this level and on the surface and in the material world, and the two cannot coexist. And they can't coexist not because spirituality is unwilling to embrace the material world, but because materiality absolutely cannot abide spirit. And so there's this dynamic tension in each one of us. And at some point, for every person, for every soul, it comes down to a pitched battle between these two forces. And on the eve of this battle between these two forces, the devotee is talking to the guru. The soul is talking to God, and it's saying, what's it saying? Really? Really? You really want me to do this? I don't want to do this. I like my life. I like my comforts. I like my ease. I like my friends. I like the things I've got. Why should I do battle with them? I'm just going to relax. It would be adharmic for me to fight against all this stuff. It's me. It's my relatives. Look out there. There's my grandfather. There's my guru. There's my cousins. There's my friends. And I know they're all creepy. They've been trying to kill us for a long time. But they're still related to me. And so what we find is this moment. And Krishna, it says Krishna as if smiling. He says, you're using the words of the wise basically to espouse the ideas of an idiot. And then he goes on to have this conversation back and forth with the devotee about why it's unavoidable to do the battle. The battle is dharmic and it's necessary. He was born for it. And it takes about 18 chapters. And they talk back and forth about all kinds of different elements. In that one little chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, in those little sections, there's more divine purity than in almost any other writing on the planet. There's more clarity. But it's set in this context because without that context, we don't understand why we end up in that position. So this whole epic, the whole purpose of this epic is to give us the power to understand vibrationally what life is demanding of us, and there is no exception. This is not their story. This is your story, played out on a stage so you can see it and feel it. But it's your story, it's your story, it's your story, it's your story, it's my story. It's Erica's story. It's everybody's story. And there's greatness in it. And it's fascinating, and it's wild, and it's comforting, and it's challenging, and it's impossible, and it's real. And so, there's an enormous number of characters. Many of them were real, and many of them are fictional. Krishna was real. He lived about 2,500 years ago. The Pandavas and Kauravas were real. There was a battle on the field of Kurukshetra, and that battle was a pitched battle between the two sides. It was a time when, in fact, Krishna was born to annihilate the entire Kshatriya race, this race of warrior kings. Because what was happening was they had all this power, and they had all this wisdom and understanding from Dwapara Yuga, how to use energy, but they were becoming more and more egocentric and more contractive and more divisive. And the world couldn't bear the weight of all this understanding used in such a small way. I'll give you an example, because where are we now? This was Dwapara into Kali. Where are we now on the cycle? We're Kali into Dwapara. We're in the exact same place on the other side of the wheel where this story takes place. Okay? And so now what you have is the exact opposite problem. You have contractive consciousness. Anybody got any examples of contractive consciousness on the planet? Okay? A little Taliban action maybe, a little ISIS action, a little Ku Klux Klan action just to bring it home a little closer. Okay? You got all that consciousness, that contractive consciousness, tied to what? An expanding awareness of power. So you have nukes and weapons of mass destruction. And the world can't take, Kali Yuga consciousness is about difference, materialism. You're different than I am, and you're in my way, I'm going to whack you. Okay? And that's okay if it's just hatchets and stuff, but if it becomes, because it's just one-on-one, I mean, it's hard on the person, but it's not hard on the planet. But you take, and I'm going to whack you with a nuke that's going to take out the entire city or the entire country or the entire half the planet, it no longer works. So you got to get rid of that consciousness, that contractive consciousness, and bring in the souls who are in tune with the new expanding consciousness. So it was a time when those kings had to be gotten off stage, and Krishna was born to usher in the new age, and very specifically to wipe out that entire race. And in fact, his warriors were incarnations to join him in wiping out the entire Kshatriya race, and then he had to get rid of them, because they were part of the problem then. And then they annihilate each other. They kind of consume them, and then he gets off stage himself. Yogananda, okay, so this is an interesting thing. This is kind of fun. This brings it a little bit more close to home. Who is that guy right there? This guy right here? Yeah. Yeah, it's Babaji. Who's Babaji? He's a reincarnation of who? Krishna. Who was Krishna's foremost disciple back during the Mahabharata? Arjuna. Okay? Arjuna was the great warrior on the positive side, on the Pandava side, on the uplifted side. And Arjuna reincarnated as who? Paramhansa Yogananda. That guy. So what you have right now on this dais and in this lineage is you have the two same cast of characters. Yogananda said that it was in the life as Arjuna that he was actually fully liberated. So what you have is, you have the avatar who liberates the disciple, and the next time it's needed, the disciple comes back to fulfill the avatar's mission. Isn't that fascinating? Because that's how it works. And these souls come back time and time again to bring us out of delusion. Another interesting aspect of the story is the fact that when he told the story, when he created the story, many of the characters he created to reflect qualities of consciousness, okay, that are inside of each one of us. And their names actually mean that. So we have two sets of, what we have is we have the original story. We have the opening of the story. The opening of the story is God the Father comes down, connects, creates Divine Mother. They create together. So Mother Nature and Spirit, they create an offspring. Okay? And that offspring is what? Ego. The individual gets created out of the union, out of the expression. And it's actually fun because it would be an immaculate conception, wouldn't it? God beyond creation, expressing through creation, creates all this individuality. And then what happens is the story begins. And the offspring of ego, or of that creation, and all the different elements, and then the first group of people are born through a sage, through a great saint, and then the next group of people, on the positive side, they're half divine, and you have the gods involved in their conception by some odd story. The guy who channeled the story, Veda Vyasa, he writes himself into the story. So he's one of the major players, which is really fun. It said that once it was done, that once it was written down, that it was sent out to all the corners of the world, so that through the dark ages it would be remembered. And in fact, what you'll find is that it has been a part of what's held the culture of India and the culture of the world together. These epics were told, and Yogananda even says in his life that whenever he and his brothers and sisters, there were 8 of them, misbehaved, his mother would pull stories from the Mahabharata to show the price you paid for misbehaving and the benefit of behaving right. And he said, in this way, education and chastisement came hand in hand. But it's a part of how the culture grew and sustained itself. I'm going to try and do something. I've never done this before this way, so we're going to try and have some fun. And we've always tried to have fun, but we're going to try and have some fun, specifically with some visual aids. Aha! What do you think? Odds? Ha! Watch this. Voila. Okay, so he's got some pictures. This is just for fun. That is who? Yep, with his foster mother, Yashoda. Krishna didn't have the privilege. Krishna's evil uncle was going to. He heard that Krishna, that this incarnation would be born to kill him, and so he imprisoned his sister and killed all the children as she had children, and the last two children were spirited away, Balarama and then Krishna, in these miraculous ways, and in that way were preserved for what actually happened, which was Krishna came back and killed his maternal uncle. You can only go so far to fight karma, and we see this as a repeated theme. But there he is with his foster mother Yashoda over in Gokula, and it's really some really great stories about his growing up. He grew up as a cowherd, very humble, like Christ, very humble. Anybody have any idea why these stories have these avatars, these great souls in humble circumstances? Why aren't they in gilded cages? Why aren't they, filled with gold and royalty and all the, exceptional things that we think is so important? So what we want is how we think it's supposed to be. We finally get it all in place and we're all going to be so wealthy and have it all work and it's going to be so nifty. But isn't that what we're trying to get? Part of the message is that that's not where goodness lies. That's not how it works. It's not where the fulfillment of life isn't in those outer trappings. And so you see them absolutely whole and fulfilled in these very bizarre and humble circumstances. He's a cowherd. And just all there is joy and sweetness and light and power and these great stories. So anyway, he was full of mischief as a young child. He was always breaking butter pots and getting into trouble and stuff. And they were exasperated with him and loved him all to pieces. And there's some great stories. We won't tell those. This is the goddess of wealth. This is Lakshmi. This is from the other epic. This is Rama and his brother Lakshman and Sita and his devotee, the monkey god, the son of the god of the wind. He's the ultimate devotee. It's said of Hanuman, all he had was devotion. Everything was devotion to Rama, his Lord. And somebody questioned his devotion one time, and he ripped open his chest, and there on his heart in gold was the word Rama. Okay. There's Krishna as the Gopala, as the cowherd, playing his flute. Anybody know what the flute symbolizes? The breath? Yeah, but more than that. Second chakra. Yeah, the sound you hear. It's funny. When you hear wind in the trees or a waterfall, doesn't it just set you tingling? It's because it's the sound of this chakra. And church bells are the sound of this chakra. And when you pluck a stringed instrument, a harp or a veena, it's this chakra. Well, the second chakra is the sound of the flute. So it's an internal call. It's a call to the inner spine, the inner world. So there he is with his gopis. Okay, and there's a beautiful one. There's a beautiful depiction of Krishna dancing the Rasa Leela, and he's dancing in a circle. And all of the gopis, it's a full moon night, and all the gopis turn out to dance with Krishna. And they're in this, and every single one of them has their own Krishna. And it's very sweet because, again, it's symbolic of the fact that God comes to each one of us. It's the same God, but it comes to each one of us for our own personal dance. Isn't that sweet? So anyway, there he is with the gopis, and they're all out enjoying the full moon on the Yamuna. And there he is with his mother when he's born, Devaki. And there he is in his chariot being driven by Krishna. Okay, the great warrior Arjuna being driven by Krishna. And we'll talk about the symbolism of that. It's a remarkable symbolism. In this, there's only 4 horses. Master was very strong. He said, it's typical, and they're the 4 directions. They're yes. It does, and he said it's very important that's right, because the symbolism is actually God, the Guru, driving the chariot of your life into the circumstances and battles that you need, and what's being controlled are the 5 senses. Okay, so they represent the 5 senses being harnessed by the great warrior, driving through his life. Okay, and there's our scribe Ganesha. Ganesha loves comfort. Ganesha banishes difficulties and obstacles, and he loves comfort. He loves good food. So, and there you have Krishna and his devotee. It's spirit and nature. It's Krishna and Radha. Okay. And there you have, again, the Trinity. You have Brahma on the right, Shiva on the left, and Vishnu in the middle. There you have the Bhagavad Gita conversation. There's the trilogy. There you have a very interesting character. And we're going to talk about it, but that is Bhishma. Bhishma is the ego. Bhishma is born of God through the Divine Mother. Okay, the ego is born through that. And this is him on his deathbed. But he has a very unusual boon. Anybody remember what the boon is? Yes? Nobody could kill him. He had to choose the time of his own death. So there he is, filled with arrows. He's on the battlefield, and he's filled with so many arrows he can no longer stand up and fight. But he's not dead because he hasn't chosen to die yet. And he's lying on the bed of arrows, and he's greatness, your ego. The ego is the great power of your life. It's the defining quality of your life. But it has to be killed off at some point. So there he is lying there, and he's thirsty. Oh, he says, first of all, I need a pillow. And somebody starts to go run up to the palace, and Arjuna knows. Arjuna understands, and Arjuna shoots 3 arrows into the ground to cradle his head. Okay? And then he says, I'm thirsty. And again, somebody starts to run up to the palace to get him something to drink. But Arjuna understands. His mother was the goddess Ganga, the goddess of the river Ganges. And Arjuna simply turns and shoots an arrow into the ground, and you see it. He shoots an arrow into the ground, and there a fountain springs up, and his mother comes to comfort him in his time of need. And there you have the Bhagavad Gita conversation, where Arjuna is saying, I will not fight. No. And there's the 5 horses. That's the chariot with the 5. And there you have the conversation between the warrior and the guru. And Krishna again with his flute by the Yamuna River and with Radha. And there is there's Hanuman, one of the stories from Hanuman, from the Ramayana. He's just such a great character. Okay, this is a very important moment, and we'll talk about this later, but it's a great graphic. It's over here as well. But that graphic is the graphic of the moment. This is Bhishma. That's ego. And Arjuna, self-control. Arjuna represents self-control. Self-control has to kill off the ego. But it's his grandfather. He loves his grandfather. Even though his grandfather is allied to the other side, he's very reluctant to do it. And so he has this great pitched battle. Bhishma is the greatest warrior. Ego is the greatest warrior. And there's this pitched battle between Arjuna, who's the greatest archer, and Bhishma, and they're just having fun. They're warriors, and they're just, it's very intense, but they're just having fun. And finally, Arjuna knows that he's supposed to kill him. He's filling him with so many arrows that he can't fight anymore. But Arjuna won't get there. He won't get over the hump. So finally, Krishna, who's vowed not to fight in the war, knows it's so important that this happened that he grabs his own disc, and he's going to go and kill Bhishma. It's very adharmic, but he's going to go do it because it has to be done, and Arjuna won't fulfill his dharma. And here's Arjuna going, oh my God. I'm about to cause this absolute dharma, and he's holding him back. He's saying, please, 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 let me make it right. Okay? So it's a great moment in the story. We'll have it actually twice in the story. We'll find this moment where it's trying to happen. And then you just have the sweetness of Yashoda, the foster mother, and Krishna, and back to the beginning. So that's our pictures. I'm going to put this up now, because this is the characters of the Mahabharata. And I'm hoping this works. I've never done this. I've usually handed out paper, which is very cumbersome. I'm hoping this works and it will stay without disappearing. What we have, the basic story, and then we're going to take a break and then we'll get into the real story. Okay, but the basic story is Santanu was a king. Mahabharata, Bharata is the name of India. And the Mahabharata is the great story of India. And so what you have is you have a great king. And his name is Santanu, and he represents God the Father, but he's just a great king. And he's very noble. And he's part of the lunar race, and he's nobility itself. And the kingdom is thriving because of his dharma. Everybody know what the word dharma means? It means righteousness. He's so righteous. And the power of his righteousness glorifies the kingdom, and everybody, and he's upright, and he's noble, and everybody's happy except there's only one problem. Santanu is lonely. Santanu is lonely. And one day he's down wandering by the river Ganges. And the river Ganges is a goddess. It's, in fact, here. We have it? Where's Shiva? Where's the Shiva picture, huh? Oh, here it is. I don't know if you can see it. It's a little bit small. But you'll see Shiva is the great Mahayogi. The river of life, the power of Divine Mother to come into this creation, came down, and it was so powerful, Ganga was so powerful as a goddess, that she had to come through Shiva, and she flowed into his matted locks, and it caught the power and diffused the power so it wouldn't destroy the universe. So the goddess Ganga came, and it's this beautiful, powerful river. If you've been to India, you know it's worshipped as a god, the presence of Ganga. And there's some miracles about the Ganges. It's apocryphal, I haven't proved it, but it's said that the Ganges does not hold contaminant germs, biological contamination, the way other water sources do. And nobody knows why, but it doesn't. People drink the water. Down in Benares, people go in and get their little pots and they drink it. They go into the Ganges to do their spiritual practices, and they'll drink the water. And there's, floating dead dogs going by, and somebody's washing their cow upstream and doing laundry, and it's just, there's no sense to it. But anyway, there's miracles around the river. Anyway, he's walking by the river near his kingdom one day, and he sees this beautiful woman, and he's immediately smitten. And they end up, and we'll tell more of the story, but they end up together, and they end up with a child. But by some peculiarity, she has to leave, and she takes the child, but she has the child trained perfectly, comes back. The child is perfectly trained to be the heir to the kingdom. And everything's fine, and they're boon companions, except there's one problem. He's still lonely. and he runs across another young lady, and he's enamored of, and he ends up marrying her, but there's a condition on that marriage. And that marriage, the condition is that her children have to be the heirs to the kingdom. And so we end up with this convoluted story, and out of that we end up with two. So you have Bhishma comes out of this marriage, and then out of this marriage you have two children. But again, it's a very bizarre story, because nothing's straightforward, because very seldom in life is anything straightforward. And you end up with these two brothers that are really half-brothers by a very bizarre context, but they're carrying on the lineage, Chitrangada and Vichitravirya. And Vyasa's ends up being the father of both of these, and then they both die before they can have kids. And so you end up with a leaderless kingdom, and Bhishma's vowed not to take on the leadership of the kingdom, He's renounced the throne, and then it gets thrust back at him. And it's, again, there's very powerful stories, an allegory woven into this about life, because when you renounce something, it comes back to you. Okay? And then there's a third brother. There's a... No, for a very good reason, because there's no room. Vidura shows up, and Dhritarashtra and Pandu show up, and I'll show you them in just a minute. And then Sanjaya shows up at the time of the Bhagavad Gita, and he is introspection, and he's telling the story to the blind king. But you end up, actually, these two are actually from Santanu through them, but they die childless. He has 3 children. He's related to Satyavati. He has 3 children through their wives and somebody else. And Vidura, the blind mind, Dhritarashtra, and Pandu, the discriminating intellect, they become the story, the lineage of this story. And so what you have here is you have the Kurus. It's the house of Kuru. And so you have the Kurus, and you have the 2 gurus. You have the blind mind, which is the father of the lineage on this side, and his son. So the blind mind, married to the power of desire, gives material desire. Duryodhana, king material desire. He's the eldest of the bad guys. And wherever he goes, he has 100 brothers, by the way, and 1 sister. I don't know why the sister, and I don't know why 100 brothers, except that the 100 brothers represent the ways of being in this world in the wrong way is myriad, and the ways of being righteous are very small but powerful. So anyway, wherever material desire goes, his next oldest brother, Dusashana, anger follows. Because wherever desire is frustrated, anger follows, always. So anyway, these 2 guys are always together. Karna he's the great tragic character in the story. He represents the desire for happiness, which we all have, committed to this world. Trying to find happiness through this world. It's not that finding happiness is wrong, it's trying to find it through the world. The biggest problem everybody has is trying to get from the world things that the world is not designed to give. The world's designed to give education and entertainment. It's not designed to give fulfillment. So anyway, he's the great character. He's the son of the god of the sun. He's radiant. It's the most beautiful thing we have is this desire for happiness. And it's the most true thing. But committed to this world is where the fatal flaw is. Drona represents, he's the trainer, he's the guru, the warrior guru of both sides. And he represents the power of habit. Because habit will train any quality equally. Your good qualities or your bad qualities. His son is the desire, Aswatthama, the desire born of past habits. Anybody here ever had a habit that they remember, oh gosh, it was so nice to when I did? Even though it wasn't good for you, even though it was bad, I've got a list of things that I can think of real quick. And this guy becomes immortal. You know what that says? That those desires born of past habits, they haunt you forever. They're always kind of just in there nibbling at you. And then if you listen to the story of St. Anthony of the Desert, when he finally gets liberated, he finally breaks through, it said Satan is banished, but he left a few minor imps always there to just bother. St. Anthony, he always kind of brush them away like mosquitoes or gnats. Well, that's that. It's Aswatthama, the power of the desire of born of past habits. You've got Gandhari's brother, Shakuni, the uncle, the evil uncle. And he's material attachment and delusion. And you've got material pride, you've got body-bounding inclinations and fear of death. You've got karma, dislikes, material attachment, and karma, all fighting on the side of, let's keep this game going. Okay? And then you've got the good guys. And the good guys are really, so remember, Duryodhana's got 100 brothers. Okay? And all these other guys. Pandu is the father of the good guy side. He represents pure discriminating intelligence. He's the faculty that you have that can see clearly. And he's married to the power of dispassion. And I couldn't find Madri, but he's got 2 wives. And he ends up with a curse. Throughout this epic, you have to understand there's recurring themes. One of the themes is that there are these nearly perfect beings called rishis, great wise sages. They live out in the woods. They live on almost nothing. They do all kinds. Anybody know what tapasya is? Austerity. It's doing things that are impossible to do, that work against your nature, and you do them anyway, and it develops this tremendous inner power. So these rishis are almost perfect. They're omniscient. They can see everything. They can do everything. But they've got one fatal flaw, which is if anybody crosses them and makes them upset, they do something. What do? They curse them. And they waste, in their curse, they waste a certain amount of their tapasya, and they have to go make up that tapasya again to get the power back. And then these poor souls that have been cursed have to go live out this thing. Okay, so this is a recurring theme. So anyway, Pandu gets cursed, which is by way of introduction. He's not the first curse in the story, by the way. He's well into the story of curses. But he gets cursed, and but he wants sons. Kings want two things. What do they want? Sons and power. Well, three things, and that power expressing as expanded territory. Okay, but kings want, and it's said that the appetite for sons is even greater than the appetite for territory. So he wants sons. He's a king, and he wants sons, but he can't have sons because he'll die if he has sons by this curse. So he invokes the gods, and the first god he invokes with Kunti is the god of Dharma, righteousness. And Yudhishthira is born. Thank you, Yudhishthira, for being here. I can't thank you enough. And then, and he's the eldest of both sides. He's elder than Duryodhana. He's older than the rest of them, and he's the rightful heir to the throne. Except there's little hidden secrets in here, subplots. But then they invoke the god of the wind, and Bhima is born, and Bhima represents vitality and power. He's this chakra right here. These are the chakras. So it's this chakra, then this chakra is born, and this chakra. Duryodhana lives here with Bhima. Okay? And Duryodhana is the lower half of the heart. It's, I love this world. I love this world, right? And Bhima is, I'm free of any kind of attachment. I'm just vitality. So it's vitality conditioned, vitality free. And then you have this chakra, and it's self-control, and Arjuna is born through the god of the heavens, Indra. And he's the most powerful archer and warrior, most skilled warrior. And you have the lower two chakras. Madri gives birth to them, and she invokes the Asvini twins, which are the Gandharvas, the heavenly, the Daivas of healing and music. So health and healing, and then music and arts. And Nakula, and then Sahadeva are born. And those are the five. Those five represent the power of the good side. And then they've got their friends and their buddies. So Drupada represents extreme dispassion. His son, Drishtadyumna, is the calm inner light, born of dispassion and the fire. And then Drupadi, it represents the Kundalini power. And by some weird circumstance, she ends up married to all five of the brothers, which is really weird. And they even think so in the story, but they figure it out. And then you have Abhimanyu, who is the son of Arjuna, who is self-mastery. Self-mastery is born of self-control. Okay? He dies in the story. I apologize, but he does. You have Satyaki, which is devotion. You have Ghatakacha, which is the son of a demon, and Bhima. And he is incredibly powerful. And he shows up for a very brief period, and then he shows up at the key moment in the battle. And he's just wild. And then you have ecstasy. They end up in Virata's kingdom for 13 years in exile. You have devotion. You have smriti, divine memory. You have celibacy. You have discriminative intelligence, power of mental resistance, power of mental adherence, and interiorization and right posture. So you have all these qualities that help the good guys. Okay? So why don't we take about a 5-minute break, stretch, and then we are going into the story. Does that sound like a good idea? Okay. Yes?
So the version that I have in mind...
Fly the flag, we're going to start, or are we all here? Maybe we're all here. Okay, anybody have any questions of where we are so far? About the setting we're going into? Do you have any questions, Sarah, so far? Okay. Yep. How about you, Melissa? Do you know the story? This is your first? Okay. Machu, Aiden, Nate, you want to come up and tell the rest of the story? They've heard it enough times, I figured. Okay. Once upon a time, there was a great king. And he ruled his kingdom with dharma, with righteousness, with power, with mercy. And he was dearly beloved. And everything was perfect except, and you'll hear this time after time, everything was perfect except he was lonely. And one day, he was down by the water's edge, feeling the power and majesty of the Ganges flowing by and reflecting the sunlight. And his heart was uplifted somehow, strangely, and he turned and he felt a presence next to him. And there near him was a surpassingly beautiful young woman. And he was immediately smitten. And he went to her and he said, I know this is a little awkward, a little maybe premature, but I am the king of this entire kingdom, this entire realm, and I have fallen hopelessly in love with you, and I would make you my queen. And she looked down demurely and she paused for a moment and she said, I also have similar feelings, and I am happy to be your queen, and we will be very happy together. But there's only one condition. And he said, well, what's that? Anything. And he says, you must never question anything that I do. Ladies, you want to make sure you get this into your prenups, okay? And he thought, well, what could this beautiful woman ever possibly do that I couldn't accept, I couldn't tolerate? And so he said, well, of course. And they went back and she was right. They were very happy together. It was an ideal marriage. And the entire kingdom, she was so beautiful and so full of righteousness and goodness and grace that she was just immediately embraced by the entire kingdom. And the entire kingdom rejoiced because finally the king had a mate and there was a possibility of heirs. And time passed, and in fact, in time, she became pregnant. And the kingdom was rejoicing, and the day came when she gave birth to a beautiful son. And as soon as the son was born, she gathered him tenderly up into blankets and silks and cradled him to her breast and walked out of the palace down to the river and stepped into the river and released the child into the water and paused a moment and then turned. And with an enigmatic smile on her face, she simply stepped back out of the river and back up to the palace. And the king heard about this. He came to see his child, and she was gone. And he said, where did she go? And he found out what had happened. And he was mortified. But he loved her, and he remembered his promise, and he said nothing, and she said nothing. And in time, she became pregnant again. And in the due course of time, she gave birth to a second son. And as soon as that son was born, she gathered him up tenderly into blankets and silks and cradled him against her breast and walked down to the river and waded in and released him to the waters. And then simply turned again with a very enigmatic smile on her face and walked back up to the palace and said nothing. And the king said nothing. And in due course of time, she became pregnant again. 5 more times this happened. And each time the king held back because he was so in love with her. But of course this rankled a bit. I mean, there he was, married to this perfect, beautiful woman with this one fatal flaw. In every other regards, their marriage was perfect. And when she became pregnant for the 8th time, he became inert with fear. And when she gave birth to the 8th son and gathered him up in blankets and held him next to her chest and started to walk out of the palace, he could hold himself back no more. And he went to her and he said, what are you doing? And with infinite sadness in her eyes, she said, I'm so sorry you asked, because now our marriage is at an end. Our deal, the agreement was that you would never question anything I did. And now that you have, our marriage is over. And he said, what is this? What kind of a person are you that would take 7 sons and now maybe an 8th and drown them in the river? I don't understand. And she said, let me tell you. And she turned to him and she said, I am not really a mortal woman. I am, in fact, the goddess Ganga. And I was born for this very thing. In the heavenly realms, there were 8 Gandharvas, these celestial beings. And they were out on a picnic one day. And one of the wives of the Gandharvas saw a cow. Now, cow in Hindi is the same word as light. So these rishis, the cow belonged to a rishi. These rishis have a lot of light, but it comes out in the story as cows. So this rishi had a magic cow, and the power of the milk of this cow was that it would make a mortal immortal. And the wife of this one Gandharva, of the 8, said, honey, go and get me that cow. I want that cow. And the Gandharva said, and you see this as a recurring theme. Again, the feminine nature, again, it's not men and women, it's the feminine nature wants to embrace something that's not necessarily wise. And so wisdom and desire are kind of doing this little competition back and forth. Well, he says it's a bad idea. The cow belongs to a rishi. It's not our cow to take. She says, well, but the milk of this cow is magic and it will give immortality. And he says, honey, we're already immortal. And she says, but I have a friend in the land of the mortals and I want this milk for her. And finally she wheedles and works on him, and desire works on our intelligence, our heart. Actually, this is a very important teaching, because the mind will follow the heart. And if the heart works on the mind long enough, the mind can justify anything. So finally he goes and he steals the cow. And he comes back and everything's fine, except that the rishi comes back and his cow is missing, and this is his favorite cow. And he's omniscient, and so he sees what's happened. These 8 rishis have taken his cow, and he shows up in front of them and says, how dare you take my cow? And they're all kind of a little embarrassed. And what does the rishi do? He curses them, because that's what rishis do when you make them mad. He says, I curse you now that you have taken my cow. You will have to be born in the land of the mortals. You'll have to take on mortal life, because having a mortal life is a curse, you see. We think it's so special, but it's a curse to have a mortal life. So there he is, and there they are, and they're all going, oh my God. And one of the qualities of a rishi's curse is that their anger is that it's violent, it's big, but it expends itself, and then it's just gone. And so the rishi has vented his anger, he's vented his spleen, and he feels a little bit bad about it. Anybody ever kind of been really angry, and then afterwards you feel a little embarrassed and feel like, the curse of the rishis came through me, and it was bad. So they go to the goddess Ganga, and they say, would you do me a favor? Would you help? Would you go and kind of see if you can mitigate this a little bit? And she goes, and she comes back, and she says, yeah, he feels a little bad about it, but the curse has been given, so you still have to live it out. But you don't have to live a very long life. All except you, he says, who laid your hands on the cow, you have to live a really long life, but it'll be a life of greatness. And you'll be known forever as one of the greatest mortals of all time. And then they turn to her and they say, will you take mortal birth and be our mother? And as soon as we're born, set us free. So this is the story he's telling Santanu. That there's so much more going on beyond what we see. And it's one of the great parts of the story that the divine realms and the human realms are often overlapping, and what looks like is happening on the surface here is something very different from what's really going on. And Santanu, he's just this guy who married this beautiful woman. He's got the story. He doesn't know what to do with it. But she says, I'm sorry, you questioned, and that's the sign that our marriage is over. And she says, but I will take this last son, I will take him with me into the heavenly realms, and I will prepare him to perfectly be your heir. And with that, she steps into the river with the sun and is gone. In one moment, everything in life changed. And that's another part of the power of this epic, is to understand that life can change just that fast. Everything in life can just change. In a moment he found Ganga and everything changed. In a moment he broke his word and everything was different. And for 16 years he was inconsolable. The loneliness that had been there before was now amplified and echoed through every moment of his life. And he lost a lot of interest in ruling the kingdom. He was still a good king, but his interest in life waned enormously. And time passed, and 16 years later, he's down riding by the river and reflecting on the unusual twists of his life. And he's just, again, enjoying the beauty of the river, but then he notices that the river, Ganges, has stopped flowing. What has the power to stop the river Ganges from flowing? So he goes upstream and he comes around the corner, and there he sees a glorious youth who is so skilled as an archer that he's shooting arrows into the river and weaving this perfect dam that stops the river from flowing. And then laughing, he runs up to the river and he pulls one arrow and the entire thing dissolves and the river flows again, and then he starts to shoot again. And Santanu's never seen anything like this, and he's just overawed. And then he feels something next to him and he turns, and there, who is next to him? Ganga, his wife of before. And he says, "Oh, you've come back to me." And he falls at her feet, and she says, again, with infinite sadness in her eyes, she says, when the day is past, do you yearn for the sun? You have to move on, that day is gone. But then she says, "I brought you something." And he says, "What?" And she calls, and she says, "Devarata, come." And she says, "Santanu, this is your son. My son, this is your father." And he is perfectly trained by the Daivas and the Gandharvas and the heavenly realms to be perfect. And he's half divine. And there he is. And she says, "I leave him with you now. He's the perfect heir to your kingdom." And for 4 years, they are inseparable. They are boon companions. And they do everything together. They go hunting, they conquer lands, they spend their time night and day. And he's trained in all the things of the specifics of the kingdom. He's perfect, and he's crowned the Yuvaraj, which means the heir apparent. And it's an actual coronation. It's more than just acknowledging that he'll be the next king. He starts to take on kingly powers. And the entire kingdom rejoices because the lineage will continue. And there's so much greatness, and he's so noble. And then one day, everything's perfect, but one day, Santanu is out, and for some reason his son isn't with him. It's just he and his charioteer. And he's out far, far from the kingdom of Hastinapur, out in the farthest parts of the realm. And he smells something. And it's intoxicating, and he follows the smell, and it leads to what? A river and a surpassingly beautiful young woman who's emitting this astral fragrance. And it's been a long time now, remember, it's been 16 years, 4 years with the sun, it's been a long time, he's been lonely, all alone, and he falls immediately in love. And he says, "Excuse me, but I am enamored of you, I'm the king of this entire realm, and I would like to make you my queen." And she says, "I would be honored, but I have to ask my father." And so she goes, and her father is the king of the fisher village. And so they go, and Santanu says to the fisher king, he says, "I am Santanu, I am the king of this entire realm, and I would like to make your daughter my queen." and he says, "Well, she's perfectly suited. I think it's a wonderful idea. I'm very honored. You honor our family and everything." He says, "But there's one condition. It has been said that her sons will rule the kingdom after you pass." And Santanu stops because he knows. He already knows who's supposed to rule. And so he goes away. But now his heart is heavy, and many of the joys of his daily life are gone. And his son comes to him. Devavrata comes to him and says, "What is it, father?" And His father says, well, you know, it's the burdens of being a king. He says, because, you know, it's said, the wise say that if a king only has one son, something could so easily happen to one son, and then there would be no heir to the kingdom. And I only have you, and you're great, but if something ever happened to you, the kingdom... And he protesteth too much. And Daiva knows something's wrong, and he kind of can sniff it out. So he goes to the charioteer and he says, who is this woman my father desires? And the charioteer tells him a little bit, and he goes to the fisher king and he says, my father is king of this entire realm. He says, he would like to make your daughter his wife and the queen of this realm. He says, you know, what is stopping this from happening? This is what my father desires. And the fisher king says, you know, we'd be deeply honored, but it's been said that her sons will rule after. And Daiva, he says, is that all it is? What is that to me? I renounce the kingdom. For my father's happiness, anything. He had so much nobility that in that moment he was willing to give up every sense of worldly power, of worldly position for his father's happiness. And the fisher king was very impressed. He said, I'm very touched that you would do that. But then there was a touch of cupidity, and he says, but what if your sons should contest the sons of my daughter? And Daiva looks at him, he's astounded at the man's cupidity, but he says, in that case I renounce all worldly life. I will never take a wife. I will never have anything to do with women. For my father's happiness, everything. And the heavens open up in that moment. And these rose petals come showering down, and the word Bhishma rings out from the heavens. And Bhishma means terrible vow. Because in this moment, he's taken a vow to renounce all normal human life for his father's happiness. And the fisher king says, my son, meet your new mother. Hands him off, and he takes Satyavati back to his father. And he arrives in Hastinapur and he says, Father, look what I have for you. And his father comes out and he sees Satyavati, this beautiful woman, and he's deeply touched. And he says, how did you manage it? And Daiva Bhishma now says nothing. And his father looks in his eyes and he knows the price that his son has paid for his happiness. But he also knows there's nothing that can be done, because once the vow is made, there it is. And so as a way of giving his son a boon, a blessing back for his great sacrifice, he takes all of his stored up tapasya, all of the righteousness of his life, and he says, I give you now a boon, that you will have the power never to be killed, and you will never die until you yourself choose it. You know, think about that for just a moment in the allegory, because the ego, anybody ever tried to kill off their ego? How does that work for you? The ego has to give itself up. Our sense of self-identity has to be relinquished by its own volition. It cannot be killed off. Okay, so as an allegory, it's great. And also for the rest of the story, it's an important part of the story. And it shows up repeatedly in the story. So time passes, and Satyavati and Santanu are very happy. And in the course of time, they give birth to 2 children. The first one is Chitrangada, and the second is Vichitravirya. And then Santanu does what everybody does. What's he do? Dies. He was not young when the second part of his adventure started, and he just gets old and just gone. And so here you have this beautiful woman with her 2 children who are too young to rule the kingdom. Who has to take on ruling the kingdom? Bhishma. So Bhishma becomes the steward for the kingdom, and he's raising these 2 boys. And time passes and things are going just really, really well. And the boys are growing up, and it's almost time for Chitrangada, the oldest, to become the Yuvaraj. So time is passing, they're growing up. And there happens to be a Gandharva, a heavenly being in the astral realms, who happens to have the same name of Chitrangada. And he hears of this mere mortal who shares his name, and he's mortified. Says, how dare a mere mortal share my name? And he comes down and he challenges him to mortal combat. And it's the code of the Kshatriyas that if you're challenged, you have to accept. And so Chitrangada accepts and is killed. And now we're down to one son. And the one son's great. He's a nice man. He's a little weak. He's a little frail, but he's royal blood, and so he's being now trained to be the Yuvaraj, to be the heir apparent. And it's about time for something to happen. What? He needs wives. Now, it's been conventional that the king of Kashi would give their daughters to the house of Hastinapura. Arranged marriages, just what happened. Time after time after time, historically. And arranged marriages were very common, but there's also a second, in India at that time, there was also a second way that women royal women could get married. And that was to have what's called a swayamvara. And in a swayamvara, what would happen is the women would be hosted to a fete. There'd be this great fete. And all of the interested kings and princes and nobility from all the way around, and often kings had many wives and that kind of thing, they would come and they would either just be there and she would just choose among them, or there would be these great feats, challenges and tests of archery or other feats, until one of them won the hand of the princess. Well, instead of giving, the king of Kashi had three beautiful daughters, Amba, Ambika, and Ambalika. Why they were named that way, I don't know. It's part of the story, but there they are. Anyway, Bhishma hears of the swayamvara that's going to happen, and he's incensed. It's an insult to the house of Hastin that these three women are not being offered to Vichitravirya and that household. So he gathers himself up, and remember, he is absolutely chaste in all the power. He's half divine, and all the power of his nature and all his self-offering is gathered into this one powerful force, and he is just beyond measure. He rides off in his chariot, and he goes off to that kingdom, and he gets there in time for the swayamvara. And as he rides up, there's all this sniggering going on. The other kings are going, these women are so beautiful that even Bhima is tempted to break his vow by their beauty and stuff. And he just simply rides up and he says, I am here for my brother. And he grabs the three women by the right hand. He grabs them, places them in the chariot, and he starts to ride off. Now, as he grabs the women, Amba is in the process of doing what? Of placing the garland over the neck of the man she has chosen, the king of Salva. Anyway, he grabs them all, he puts them in the chariot, and he starts to ride off. All the rest of the kings, they gather themselves off, and they're going to do a pitched battle. How dare he break up this fete and our chances, and who does he think he is? And so there's a great running battle, and Bhishma is so powerful, he's just holding them all off. But one king fights especially powerfully. And he's fierce beyond measure, and Bhishma destroys everybody else, but there's Salva, and he's just fighting with everything he has. And finally, Bhishma manages to kill his charioteer, ruin his chariot, kill the horses, and he's got Salva in his power. And he says, I have your very life in my hands, but I grant you mercy, go your way. And then he gets back in his chariot and rides back to Hastinapura. And he brings the three beautiful women in, and he says, see what I found, look what I've got. And he presents them. Vichitravirya is delighted. Everything's happy, except what? Amba had already given her heart. And she finally stops the proceedings and she says, excuse me, sir, but just as you barged in, I was placing this garland around the neck of the man I had chosen, the king of Salva. And Bhishma looks at her and says, why didn't you tell me? And she says, well, I was a little intimidated. I was a little scared. There was a lot going on. And I just, And he says, okay, well, he gathers her up. He gives her a huge entourage. He says, clearly you've given your heart. You should go back to Salva and continue your nuptials. So she goes back, and she goes to the kingdom of Salva, and she says, my lord, I am here. I have been returned. I have been released from that captivity, and here I am. And he looks at her and he says, I accept no gifts from that man. And he scorns her, and he sends her away. And so she goes back and she says, he won't take me. He wants nothing to do with me because you took me. He says, and Salva says, Bhishma took you by the right hand. That means that you belong to him. And she goes back and Bhishma says, well, Vichitravirya, you've got 3 wives now. And he says, but I can't take her. She's given her heart to somebody else. And so they send her back to Salva again, and he says no, and comes back, and Vichitravirya can't do anything about this because it would be a dharmic to marry her because her heart's given. It wouldn't be, and Ambika and Ambalika, they're pretty happy with the arrangement. Here's this great noble soul. It's a great kingdom. They're princesses, now queens. It's a wonderful thing. And they feel a little bad about their sister, but, things are going along fine. And Amba, she basically hangs out for a number of years. And she says to Bhishma, she says, you ruined my life. You have to marry me. And he says, I would, but I've got this vow. I can't marry you. And she wheedles and works on him and stuff and back and forth, and nothing happens. He will not break his vow. He says, I would. You're beautiful. You're wonderful. I'd love to marry you, but I can't, and I won't. So there she is in the middle of this no man's land. Well, time passes. And we'll tell the story of Amba, I think, later. See where I want to fit that in. Yep, okay, I'll fit that in later. Help me remember, I have to finish my story of Amba. Very important. But Ambika and Ambalika and Vichitravirya, they're just having a great time. They're enjoying each other. They're enjoying married life. They're enjoying the fact that he's going to be king. Everything's great. And then, nope, he gets pneumonia and dies. And what do you have? You've got this kingdom, and you've got Satyavati and these 2 beautiful women, 3 beautiful women, but one's grumpy. These beautiful women, and no heir to the kingdom. And so Satyavati does the unthinkable. Can you imagine what she does? She goes to Bhishma, and she says, it's said in the scriptures that if your brother's wives die without an heir, that you can have a child through those wives for the sake of continuing the lineage. And Bhishma looks at her and he says, after all I've done for you, after all I've given up in your name, how dare you come and ask me to do this thing? And he is absolutely adamant. He will not budge. And time passes, but then Satyavati, she's desperate. She's desperate for an heir to the kingdom because the line of the Kurus is going to die off if nothing is done. And then she tunes into and kind of calls up a memory from her childhood, because it seems that when she was a young girl, through her father's fisher village, a great sage came. And this great sage, these great rishis would come through different places, there was a great blessing that would be bestowed by their presence by them onto the kingdom or onto the fisher village or wherever if they were happy when they left. And so often the young women were sent off to care for these great sages and make sure their needs were taken care of. And so Satyavati was sent to take care of this rishi, but the rishi became very enamored of her, and in the course of time they had a child. So she was just a young girl. And she raised the child for a period of time, but then the sage came back through the village. And the child, I think he was 7 at the time or 12. He was very young, maybe 10. But he was very young, but he had a very powerful and noble nature. And he was clearly the son of this great sage. And he said to his mother, when the sage was there, "Mother, that's my life. I wish to go with my father." And he went. And he becomes who? Vedavyasa. So Vedavyasa, who wrote the story and tells the story, is now in the story and is the son of this great noble woman. And she goes, I know how to do this. So she thinks of him, and he's so great that he just appears because she called. He was in tune with her enough. And he says, "Mother, what can I do for you?" And she tells him the story. And she says, "I want you to have children to continue the lineage through Ambika and Ambalika." he's a wild man. He's a rishi. He's out there. He's got dreadlocks. He eats little bits of rice. He lives on nothing. He does endless hours of tapasya and meditation, and he's just wild. But he's got all this power. And he says, okay, I think this is a righteous thing. The scriptures say that under desperate measures these things are allowed. Okay, so he comes to Ambika. And now Ambika, this is not her ideal. She's of noble blood. This is not her idea of a good time. But Satyavati says, you must. And she's so put off by his appearance that she closes her eyes for the entire night. And they manage to accomplish the feat. But in the morning, Vyasa goes to his mother and says, well, you will have a child by us. But he says there's a problem because she was so put off by me that she kept her eyes closed all night, and so this one son will be born blind. Now, a blind king, this is not ideal. This doesn't work very well. So she is mortified. So she goes to Ambalika. And she says, it's your turn. In the course of time, Dhritarashtra is born, and he is indeed blind. She goes to Ambalika, and she says, you must have a child by Vyasa for the sake of the lineage. And she says, don't you dare close your eyes. Don't you dare. And so he's also not Ambalika's ideal. And she's so scared, so afraid because of his power, and that she pales beneath. And this is a dark-skinned race. This is India. So, anyway, they accomplish. He goes in the morning. He says, she will have a child by me. And he'll be wise, he'll be strong, he'll be great, but he'll be pale, because she was so terrified that she was pale during the night. Well, that's okay. But then she goes back to Ambalika. Years passed, she's had the blind child. She goes back to Ambika, and she says, one more time. And Vyasa says, okay. So he comes back, and Ambika is so put off that she sends a serving maid. And the serving maid sees the greatness of Vedavyasa. She sees past the surface, and she feels the divine power and the greatness that's there. And she knows it's a privilege to have a child by this great soul. And so she is very welcoming, and in the morning, Vyasa goes to his mother and says, this is my perfect child. This is the perfect son. He says, but it has nothing to do with your lineage anymore. And she's just put out, she says, one more time to him. And he says, desperate measures are allowed 3 times, not more. It's not right for a rishi like me, for a hermit like me to be doing this thing. He says, no, not even for you, mother. And he goes away. So there she has Dhritarashtra, the blind son. She has Pandu, the brother, who is great and noble, but he's the second born. And then she has this great and perfect son, Vidura, who is wisdom itself, but he has nothing to do with her lineage. And there she is, and there's the kingdom. And now, who has to rule it again? Because it's these 3 small boys. Bhishma is ruling the kingdom yet again. Okay. So, time passes. And it's a little confusing because it's not right that Dhritarashtra be the king in solo, although by position he should be, but he's blind, so it's not okay. So what happens is kind of this kind of quasi-compromise gets put in place where he's the king, but Pandu's also the king because he's the perfect, he's a good son, everything works, but he's a great warrior, and he's always out conquering new kingdoms, and things are fabulous under this reign, and then Vidura's the wise counselor. And they grow up, and they're made the Yuvaraj, and everything's fine, and everything's perfect. And then it's time to get them married. We want to get on this pretty early. So Bhishma goes out, and he finds a woman, a princess, and her name is Gandhari. And Gandhari is going to become the wife of the blind king, Dhritarashtra. And her father is very upset. He says, how can you marry a blind king? You can do better than that. She says, no, this is my dharma. And she's so noble of character, she's so great of character, that on her wedding day, she takes and she binds her eyes so that she can't see, because she says, it would be unfair of me to have any advantage over my husband. So if my husband can't see, I, for the rest of my life, will also be blind. And there's so much nobility of character that she develops an inner sight. And she often knows things that otherwise would not be available. And so there's this wonderful marriage of the blind king, the blind mind, to, and I think it's the power of desire. Come on. This only kind of works, doesn't it? So we want to get into the second phase of this. Gandhari is power of desire. Okay. Pandu also wants to get married, and he catches the fancy of this remarkably powerfully magnetic and noble woman. Her name is Kunti. And he and Kunti get married. And we'll tell Kunti's story. I don't think now's the time. It is actually the time. I don't know if we have time. Anyway, he marries Kunti. And then he marries a second woman, and her name is Madri. And things are great. Kunti has a little bit of a backstory. Kunti was the princess, daughter of a great king, whose brother had no children. Kunti Boha had no children. And so his brother offered him to raise Kunti as his own. And so she took on the name Kunti and as the foster daughter of this great king, Kunti Boha. And she was very, very noble of character, and it was a beautiful kingdom, and things were great. And one day a sage comes through, and she is, Durvasa is his name, and she is sent to care for Durvasa. And she is, 14 years old, 13, 14 years old, very young. But she's so noble of character that she takes perfect care of him and makes sure everything is just right for his entire stay. And as he leaves, he's so taken by her, he gives her a boon. And he must have known that there would be a need for this in the future as well. And he says, "You're so pure of spirit, I want to give you a boon." And that boon is a mantra that allows you to call any god you wish to come and be with you. Wow. So he teaches her and she practices the mantra. And then Durvasa goes on his way and he blesses the kingdom and great things happen. And a few days later, sometime later, Kunti is just sitting by her window watching the sun rise over the horizon. It's a beautiful spring morning. It's just glorious. She's so caught in the majesty and the beauty of the light coming up that she thinks, "Oh, I wish for that light to be close." And then she remembers the mantra. And she decides to call on the god of the sun, Surya. So she invokes the mantra, and sure enough, out of that beautiful radiance, brighter and brighter, closer and closer, comes this glorious light into her room. And there stands the god of the sun, Surya. And she's just overwhelmed by his presence and so touched. And a few moments pass, and he says, "Well?" And she says, "Well, thank you for coming. It's been nice." And he says, "You called me." And she says, "Yes, I know. It was nice. Thank you. Goodbye." He says, "No, I don't think you understand. This mantra isn't for me to come for tea. This mantra you've invoked is for you to have a child by me." She's 14 years old. She's a princess. There's nothing in the script that allows for this. And she starts to weep. She says, "Well, can't we forget this?" I didn't know. He says, "I'm sorry, once the mantra has been invoked, it has to be fulfilled." He says, "But in this particular case, it will be a miraculous birth. It will happen instantly, and you'll immediately go back to being a virgin, and no one will know." Kunti says, "Okay." There's no choice. What are you going to say? So she, they go through with this. She conceives, and she gives birth to a beautiful and radiant son. And he's got a golden shield on his chest and golden earrings that are part of him. And he's just magnificent. And her heart goes out to him. And all that's maternal in her wakes up and she feels, but she knows that she can't keep him. It would destroy her father. It would destroy their lives. And with the deepest sadness in her eyes and in her heart, she gently gathers him up and wraps him in silks and puts him in this beautiful box. And with the dawning of the morning, she walks down to the river and places the box into the water. And with tears flooding from her eyes, she sets the box adrift on the river and goes back into the kingdom. So this is and no one has ever been told. No one knows. It's her secret that she has to carry with her. In the course of time, what happens? See how much time we've got. In the course of time, what happens is Pandu is out. Everybody's happy. The kingdom, they're becoming Yuvraj. Everything's doing great and glorious. Things are moving along. Pandu is helping rule. He's conquering kingdoms. He and his wives are out there. Gandhari and Dhritarashtra ruling the kingdom with the support of Vidura. Everything's perfect. Bhishma is finally beginning to see light at the end of the tunnel. He can see when he can finally relinquish this damn kingdom he's been holding on to. Way past his interests, way past anything. And time is passing. And Pandu is out with his wives. He's been conquering kingdoms. They're rejoicing. They're out on a little vacation. Watch out for vacation. They're out on a vacation. And they're just relaxing, enjoying each other and themselves in the forest. And what happens? Pandu goes out hunting. It's time for dinner. He's going to go out hunting. And he sees in a glade across the way this magnificent buck. But he's in the act of mating. And it's adharmic to shoot an animal when their attention is distracted. And he knows this, but he's so caught in the hunt, and it's such a magnificent specimen, that he goes ahead and shoots anyway. And much to his horror and ultimate chagrin, as the buck falls dying, he and the doe turn back into what? Human beings. And it's a rishi and his wife who had taken animal form to sport in the woods. And the rishi does what? He curses him. He says, "How dare you? You know better than this. How dare you shoot me like this in that act?" He said, "It's a sacred act." He says, "I curse you now that if you ever come near any woman ever again in this amorous mood that I was in, you will instantly fall down dead." Again, once again, in a split second, everything has changed. And Pandu, he all of a sudden has lost a little bit of interest in life. He's kind of a little bit put off, and he goes back and he tells his wives what's just happened. And he sends a message back to Hastinapur. He says, "Tell Dhritarashtra and Vidura and Bhishma that I'm not coming back. I'm going to stay in the woods with the rishis, and I'm going to learn the ways of the rishis, and I'm going to give my life over to contemplation. I'm done with this world." Bah. And in the course of time, that's what happens. They just live with the rishis and things are doing fine, but in the course of time, what happens? What's the avarice of kings? For lands and for heirs, for sons. And that hunger for sons shows up, and he says to Kunti, "What are we going to do for an heir for the kingdom? We have to do something. What are we going to do? What are we going to do?" And he tries to get the women to have, because not only can you have the lineage continue through brothers, but also through saints. It's in the scriptures, it's okay, desperate measures. So he tries to get his wives to have sons through these rishis, and they both have nothing to do with it. They will not have anything to do with it. But then Kunti reveals her secret. She says, she doesn't tell about that firstborn, but she tells that she was given this mantra. And this just delights Pandu no end. And so they plot. He plots and he says, "Let's invoke the god of Dharma." And so in the course of time, she invokes the god of Dharma, and she becomes pregnant, and she gives birth to Yudhishthira. And he's so overjoyed, he says, "Let's do it again." And so they invoke the god of the wind. And on the day, Vayu comes and they have a child, and on the day that Bhishma is born, on that same day, Gandhari and Dhritarashtra give birth to a son. But they don't just give birth to a son. It's a very odd story, and I don't have time to go into it all. Basically, there's terrible evil omens, but she gives birth, she gets pregnant, she gives birth to this big black mass. And it's a stillbirth, but it's just, nobody's seen anything like it. And they throw it away, but the sage comes and he says, "No." He'd blessed, he said, "You'll have 100 sons." He says, "No," and he takes it down and he gets 100 pots of oil, and he cuts it all up and he drops it all in, and the biggest chunk anyway. So they all hatch on the same day. They're all born on the same day that Bhima is born. Okay, so Bhima and Duryodhana are born on the same day, but they're not the eldest. The eldest is Yudhisthira. So, and it's 100 sons and one daughter. And then, of course, Pandu is hungry for more sons. So they invoke the god of the heavens, which is Indra, and they have Arjuna. And then Pandu is insatiable because they say, it just the appetite grows by what it feeds upon. He says, let's have another one, let's have another one. And she says, no, desperate measures are allowed 3 times. And he thinks, he wheedles, and he thinks, he goes, but Madri, she doesn't have any children. Don't you think she should have children? Why don't you teach her the mantra? And so they do, and Madri invokes the Asvini twins, and she has Nakula and Sahadev. And so you have now both lineages born, and you have the ages. But Duryodhana, material desire, lives in the kingdom. He's doted on by the blind mind. He's indulged. They just think that they are the royalty and they're going to take over the kingdom when their dad dies and everything. And they're spoiled and they're rotten. And meanwhile, in the forest, these noble boys are growing up in austerity, in simplicity, and they're being coached by the rishis. They're learning the truths. They're becoming extremely powerful and beautiful and noble. They're half divine. And there's this great glow of power and radiance around them, and everything's fine. Until 16 years into the story, what happens? It's spring, it's beautiful, and it's been a long time. And, the memory of the curse is a little bit gone. And Pandu, in a mad moment, becomes enamored of Madri. And as soon as he touches her in that amorous mood, and she runs from him, she tries, she flees, she knows what's going to happen. But she can't avoid him, and Pandu falls down dead. And there's this horrible wail goes up, and everybody runs, and there's Pandu. There's the great Pandu, and he's just dead. So now there's these 2 women, and they both say to each other, I will step onto the funeral pyre with my husband. I'm done with this whole story. I'm going to go and die. It's an eternal bond. I will die with my husband. And Madri turns to Kunti, and she says, you can't. Somebody has to stay here for the boys. You're a better mother. You're more noble. It was me that caused his death. You have to stay. And the rishis all agree. So she agrees that she will stay. Madri steps onto the funeral pyre and is gone. Again, in one moment, everything changes. But now here these noble scions of the house of Hastinapura, the house of Kuru, living in the woods. It's no longer appropriate for them to stay in the woods. And it's time for them to go back to the kingdom of Hastinapura. And there we run out of time, and there we will break our story for the night. Are there any questions about where we are? The one sister is in Hastinapura. It's part of the 100 brothers and one sister. Yes, and the one sister never shows up except the fact that she's there. You never hear of her again except that she is there and she's part of the storyline, and I don't know why she's there. There are things that are mysteries beyond me. It's past my pay grade. Yes? Huh? Gandhari. Yeah, Dhritarashtra's wife. And there were terrible evil omens, and in fact, so much so that when they were born, Durvasa said, or one of the great sages said, these evil omens foretell that this son, Duryodhana, will be the death of all your sons. And it says that you can, for the sake of a family, a child can be killed. For the sake of a village, a family can be killed. For the sake of a country, a village can be destroyed. You should destroy this one child and save everybody else. But of course, Dhritarashtra and Gandhari can't do it. And so the child stays alive. We should kill off our material desires, but of course, we don't. So.
Do all of the characters so far represent quality?
Mm-hmm.
Every one of those guys represent. So then if you understand the story, yeah, okay.
Okay, so you have the blind mind that gives birth through the power of desire to material desires, and anger, and avarice, and greed, and jealousy, and envy, and all the other qualities that go hand in hand with desire, and with this world, and wanting to maneuver, and power, and hunger for power, and all those kinds of things. And then on the other side, you have Dharma, which is the eldest son. And then you have vitality, the power of vitality. Then you have self-control. Then you have niyama, the power to stay in tune with things that bring you close to spirit. And you have yama, which is the avoidance of things that take you away. So those are the qualities of the chakras. Those are the qualities of those characters. Yeah, and Pandu was discriminating intelligence, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So yeah, it does. You can start to see, if you really dig into the qualities, you can start to see the interplay of these different things. And what you're going to see is the qualities that bring us close to spirit versus the qualities that try and draw us into the world. And they're both inside of us, and they both are active. And depends on where you give strength. And sometimes one's strong, sometimes the other's strong. They go back and forth. And that's the story. So on we go. Any other questions? Great questions. Any other questions? Has this been okay? Okay.